Welcome everyone to today's Climate Services webinar. I'm Maggie Hurwitz from Weather Service Climate Services Branch, and I'm joined by my colleague Jenna Myers, who is going to help field your questions today. So our webinar today is focused on local drought communication and coordination, with some great examples from across the country. So before we start with the presentations, I thought I would share a few updates. So one is that we're implementing a new drought listserv this week. And this is really to improve communication across the Weather Service and beyond of drought forecasters and experts. And really with the larger goal of strengthening the connections between the climate services and water resources services programs. The listserv is going to be a streamlined way to share drought-related information. For example, upcoming events and webinars, tools and resources, new papers or research results. And also, we know that there are existing methods to communicate about ongoing drought events. In fact, we'll hear about some of that today. But this listserv is yet another way to share interesting case studies or get input from your drought colleagues. We're expecting that there'll be over 200 members, including representatives from all of the local offices, RFCs, and WFOs within the Weather Service, as well as regional headquarters, and CPC and OAR colleagues from programs such as MIDA. So this is, as I say, it's being implemented as we speak. Please look for an invitation email this week. And if you don't receive an invitation for some reason and you're interested in joining the listserv, please contact me next week. Also, perhaps one of the first things that I'll be advertising on this listserv is our next Climate Services webinar. And that'll take place August 25th at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be a presentation by Krista Peters-Ladard, and I'm very fortunate to call a colleague from NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. She's going to discuss an overview paper about drought indicators for monitoring and prediction, in particular recent advances in modeling and remote sensing that have advanced these drought indicators. So again, I'm going to advertise this through the new drought listserv, but you can also sign up with the link shown at the bottom. Finally, I wanted to review drought information statements, which are the products issued by weather forecast offices to communicate local drought status, since that's the topic of today's webinar. So the directive or policy regarding drought information statements was updated last fall with a new format and mixed case lettering, which should make these statements slightly more readable, and also with modified issuance criteria. So I wanted to share an example. So this is the new format. It's pretty straightforward with a headline, synopsis, summary of impacts, and so forth, which now kind of combines the meteorological and hydrological status and outlook together. So instead of just this list, I actually would like to share a current drought information statement from the Washington, D.C. area where I live, since this is a good way to show you the format in real life. So this is the beginning of the statement, again, from the Sterling, Virginia office, with the headline here shown in bold, and then the synopsis, which can include the drought intensity, precipitation, temperature, and hydrologic conditions, depending on the drought situation. Then a summary of the impact and mitigation actions, if any. And then the drought outlook. We're expecting more hot weather here in the DC area. The next issuance date, and then followed by related websites acknowledgement and contact information for the local WFO. Also, in the latest update, the issuance criteria for drought information statements was modified. So these statements will be issued if there's any of your county warning and forecast area experiencing drought at the D3 level or higher, and that's pretty severe drought. And we strongly encourage WFOs to issue drought information statements if there's drought occurring at the D1 or D2 level, or if local drought impacts have been reported. And that's the situation at the moment in the Washington area. So, and please feel free to contact me should you have further questions. So I wanted to move on to today's presentations. First, we'll have Ray Wolf representing the Central Region, then Aaron Jacobs representing Alaska Region, of a really interesting case study of drought in Alaska, and followed by Rebecca Ward and Klaus Albertin, who will talk about drought communication and coordination at the local and state level. And finally, we should have time for questions. So you can enter those in the question box in GoToWebinar, or use the raise your hand feature, and we'll try to get through as many as possible today. So we'll go on to Ray Wolf's presentation.
Okay, thanks, Maggie. It looks like the screen has changed. Does it look good on your end?
Yes, it does. So, Ray,
Right.
he's on to you.
We'll go ahead and get started here. We'll talk about some of the things that are going on in Central Region, many of which have actually evolved over a pretty lengthy period of time. But anytime we talk about drought, it's important to put in perspective where Weather Service fits. Of course, at the core of the drought discussion, because of the Drought Monitor, is the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska. But unlike, severe weather or tropical weather, where we're used to being the core drivers, there are lots of different players in the drought conversations, and I think it's good to acknowledge them up front. For example, in Central Region, we have 2 USDA climate hubs. The Midwest Climate Hub is especially engaged. We have a tremendous core of state climatologists in almost every one of our states that are definitely strongly involved in the conversation. We have support from the regional climate centers in Midwestern and High Plains. On the water side, both the USGS and the Corps of Engineers are in. And then actually many elements within NOAA, including us, but NCEI, of course, the Climate Prediction Center, the National Water Center is moving in the direction of getting more engaged. Our Operations Center at Central Region, and 3 regional DEWs that cover all or parts of Central Region are also key partners. Briefly, some of the impacts that are important for us that drive our drought discussion in Central Region. Agriculturally, you can see in the map in the upper right there, the green area represents basically the Corn Belt, which is one of the most significant ag-producing regions in the entire world. So you can imagine what happens weather-wise that affects crops in this area is important at a global scale. So ag is a major driver to our drought discussion. Also, with 4 main stem rivers that support navigation, the Missouri, Mississippi, Illinois, and Ohio, how drought affects flows on those rivers is key for navigation, because that's a pretty significant industry. Water supply is important, perhaps not as much so as in other parts of the country, but there are a number of municipalities, especially that depend on surface water for their water supply, so they're under drought conditions can be strongly impacted. Drought, of course, is a negative effect toward increasing fire weather issues, and we have quite a wide-ranging fire weather program in Central Region, from your typical mountain type scenarios in Colorado and Wyoming. We have forested areas in the upper Midwest and the southeast part of Central Region. And then in between, we have the tall grass and midgrass prairies. And it's interesting, even within the prairie region, there's subtle differences between what we see in the plains in the Midwest. And you can't forget the Great Lakes, even though right now we're dealing with high levels of water in the Great Lakes system. Drought can be a significant moderator of water levels there, and that can be an important discussion point too. So from a regional perspective, the partners, NCEI, the USDA, NIDIS folks, our state and regional climatologists, and us, put together a monthly webinar series on climate and drought. The drought topic floats to the top as its importance is over the year. They do seasonal summaries at the end of each season, kind of a recap of what happened climate-wise and what sort of impacts there were. And then also special releases. There was one that just went out a few weeks ago relating to the potential for drought development when we were looking at the threat of extreme heat over the latter part of July into August. There's some issues, drought-related issues that have popped up related to that. So there's the regional scale, but the real discussion here that we're after is what do we do at the WFO? And in recent years, we've kind of evolved to a model where instead of a number of people from a given state overwhelming the Drought Monitor weekly author with a bunch of input, we've encouraged the WFOs to feed the input to the state climatologist, who has access to some of the other partners I mentioned, and they merge the information and then provide a single recommendation for the state to the drought author that week. And we found that's been a much more efficient approach to the process than the way we used to do it. There's some exceptions to this. Usually the state climatologist or the state climate office is the lead in the discussion. Indiana, it's actually their department, State Department of Homeland Security, hosts the effort. In the state of Nebraska, David Pearson, the service hydrologist at the Omaha office, leads the effort for the Nebraska discussion. And then up in Wisconsin, which is our only state without a funded state climatologist or state climate office, Jeff Point up at our La Crosse office leads that effort. But in general, as I indicated earlier, the WFOs are part of a bigger group of folks in the overall discussion. Now, Maggie mentioned the drought statement, and while there's a lot of good information in the drought statement, one of the things we lamented about many years ago is that it's all text and no graphics and about as visually interesting as this PowerPoint slide is. So as we moved into development of our web pages, drought was on the list, and we actually had every WFO many years ago had their own drought page where they could manage the local information and share that with media and other partners. Due to an upgrade a few years back, those got wiped out, but we're looking to reinvigorate the program, and here's a prototype. I have a link at the bottom of the slide there. And the format follows pretty closely to the drought statement format. It just adds a lot of graphics. It also importantly gives our drought statements a home on our web page, which if you try to find the drought statements on the web page, unless a local WFO has made specific efforts to make those readily available, you probably won't find them. So some of the other things we have on there, of course, it's the bottom line up front is getting to what is the drought monitor status for our area. There's a tab for local impacts, a tab for recent precipitation and temperatures, our precip forecasts, both from WPC and CPC, and then the monthly and seasonal outlooks and drought outlooks. So again, sort of a much more visually pleasing approach than just simply the text drought statement. But we know with web pages that they require the users to actually go to the web page and take a look at it. And now in Central Region, with our evolution to a more aggressive DSS approach, we've developed a situation report format to provide a drought briefing. And the idea here is that while the information content actually is not significantly different than our web page, that pushing the information to our key partners is a much more efficient way to approach the conversation, especially when something like drought, you might be a TV meteorologist and you might not see drought in your viewing area for a few to even several years. So being able to push information to the key partners is important. We have a standard template that'll be coming out soon in Central Region or updated soon. But one of the key things with the drought statement is that it auto-populates. So it's pretty easy to put together. And I'm gonna step out of PowerPoint here and go and take a look at the PDF and just very quickly skim through so you can get a sense of the flavor. And if anybody's interested in the PowerPoint template for this, let me know and I can certainly email it to them. But again, following from our webpage, it starts out with what the current drought status is. We found what's important and really a great conversation point is how things have changed in the last week. Now we look in the Midwest here, we look at a weekly interval because most of our significant droughts have a warm season bias to their occurrence, and things can change quickly, especially with impacts to crops. But you can, for your local area, the interval for issuing these can certainly be customized to what's important for your users. We take a look at what the last week's precipitation and percent of normal is. We step into soil moisture again because of the ag and hydro aspects of our droughts. Soil moisture is a key component. We'll take a look at temperature and departures from normal. You see the warm temperatures we've been experiencing over much of the Midwest for the last week or so. A blank page that you can fill in if perhaps working on a monthly or seasonal time scale, or if there are other data summaries or maps that you want to use. This is just a placeholder for that. The USGS has some nice graphics that depict the status of stream flow levels. We pull in some fire weather information from the fire weather folks out west. Summary of the impacts and actions. And this page actually is the one that probably requires the most work, but if you're doing your drought statement anyway, that information just is a straight conversion to these bullet points. We take advantage of WPC's 7-day precipitation forecast to give a sense of who the fortunate rain receivers are going to be and who's going to tend to be on the dry side. And we then step in to the CPC week 2 outlooks. These are the standard outlooks. We could add, if there's a precipitation hazard outlook for unusually wet weather, we could add that to the discussion too. We've got the week 3 and 4 outlooks here, and then we move to the monthly outlook, which also includes the drought component there, and then the seasonal outlook. And then finally, just a summary page of what the key points of the current drought status are. So that's a quick and dirty way to pull a whole lot of information together and provide some graphics, some visuals that I think are important for understanding what's going on drought-wise in our local areas. And with that, Maggie, that wraps up what I have to present.
Thank you so much, Ray. Actually, I think it's best to, there is one question, so I think it's best to go right to that, about how often these drought briefings are put together and if you do this on a weekly basis.
Yep, this is a new thing, a new tool that we've added just this summer. And what I think we envisioned is that the drought briefings would go out on a schedule that mirrors the drought statement. And we've recommended tying the drought statement issuance to the release of the Drought Monitor on Thursday morning. So wait for the new Drought Monitor to come out, see if you need to update your drought statement. If it's good, move on to the next thing. If you update the drought statement, then it's not too hard to update this drought briefing and email that to the partners you're looking to hit.
Okay, thanks, Ray. There were a couple of follow-up questions about, are you doing any analytics about who is accessing either the drought information statements or these briefings?
We just started the putting out the briefings, but we control who receives them. So for example, for our media partners, certainly when the time comes for us to do this, our WCM will do some follow-up with the media folks to get feedback on how close to hitting the mark for sharing the information these are for their needs. So I think our follow-up would be more working with specific user groups. It's interesting, emergency management tends not to be too engaged in drought in our area because most of the impacts are agricultural, and the financial aspect of those is worked through the USDA and not so much a FEMA exercise. Now, if we get into exceptional drought where you start having municipalities impacted, then perhaps emergency managers are more keyed in. But by and large, for our situation over most of Central Region, it's the ag impacts. So feeding the media is our key goal.
Okay, thank you. Again, Ray, that was great and great example of effective communication. So let's go west and north to Alaska, and the next presentation by Aaron Jacobs.
Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, my name is Aaron Jacobs. I'm the Senior Service Hydrologist for WFO in Juneau, and we do have a very interesting situation in where my area of responsibility is that we're in a rainforest, and communicating drought has been a very interesting and learning experience from the last cycle we were just in. And so my presentation here is kind of going to go over what type of steps we have done to improve our communication of drought in a rainforest, and how to come up with what impacts we do see. And so this presentation is kind of going to go through like what is drought conditions in a rainforest, and then like what sectors are affected, along with them. How do we communicate with our partners before, during, and after a drought, and then looking into how we provided IDSS to Metlakatla Indian Community through this severe drought cycle that we were in. And then we also were able to put on a drought workshop here in Southeast Alaska towards the middle of this drought that we were in. And we were able to learn a lot of communication improvements, and how to find out what types of impacts those sectors were seeing. And through that partner input, we were able to continue to redefine what drought metrics are with our partners, with the U.S. Drought Monitor and the NIDIS group. And then also kind of continue our updates with the partners, and how they can get sources of information to keep those communication lines open. So first I want to kind of go through what is a temperate coastal rainforest, and they don't really occur very many around the world. There's only 6 outside of Alaska, and Tongass National Forest is the largest, over 16 million acres, and that is essentially our whole area of responsibility for WFO Juneau. And to keep it into context, the size of our area is the size of Florida, so it's a very large swath of responsibility area that we do have. And with the temperate rainforest, you have a lot of cloud cover, a lot of trees, and it covers a lot of the sky, so you don't really have a lot of evapotranspiration that will cause to drought conditions in other places of the lower 48. And that is one big difference in a temperate rainforest compared to a tropical rainforest, in the sense that it's cooler, it's not as warm. Mean temperatures are from 39 to 54 degrees, but just as wet or wetter, where we can have average of 60 to over 200 inches a year. And a lot of the climate is moderated through the proximity to the ocean. And as you can see from these images, the Alaskan rainforest is very diverse, it's very complex, and there's an interesting web between societal impacts and relationships and the ecology. And so in that, with a rainforest, Southeast Alaska is the land of precipitation. And as you can see from this map, you can see that precipitation values are fairly high, but they also range quite a lot from our drier locations up in the Haines area, in the northern portions of the Panhandle, and then all the way down to Ketchikan, where they have over 140 inches, and then even Port Alexander in the southern, just south of Sitka, has over 163 inches annually. And so first I'll just kind of quickly go over what is a drought. And I know a lot of people on this call probably know what it is, but it's a lot different from what a typical drought is. Drought origins from deficient precipitation over an extended period of time, and the impacts result from an interplay between the natural event and then the demand people have on the natural water supply. And so in the northern climates, a lot is different and is maybe not as known. So drought is not really clearly defined, with areas with long snow cover, low evaporation, or in my case, lots of precipitation. But one thing that we have to keep in mind is the timing. Timing is really important. What time of the year do you get your rainfall? What time frames are you looking at for certain deficiencies? Where if you get above normal precipitation in our dry season in May or June, it may not be as impactful to saying getting out of a drought or coming into a drought, saying if we have heavy precipitation in our wet season, where you have in September, October, instead of getting just maybe 15 inches of rain, you're getting like 30 inches of rain. And then there's these differences between precipitation drought and snow drought, where of course precipitation drought, you just have less precipitation fall out of the sky, and that was the main drought concerns that we just were in from 2017 to 2019. And then we also have these snow droughts where we have normal precipitation, but we don't have normal snow accumulation in higher elevations or at sea level. And that's something that we experienced in 2014, 2015. And the snowpack is very important for keeping our stream flows up in the summertime, and then also recharging hydroelectric power reservoirs. But Southeast Alaska is not, we have seen these patterns before as this, we're looking at standardized precip index for this, looking back from 1925 to 2019. And you can see that there has been periods of long duration lack of precipitation, but there's also times of heavy precipitation or a lot of precipitation, like in the late 1990s into the 2000s. But as you can see towards the end of the graph, we were in a cycle where it was pretty long duration and pretty significant in the sense of we haven't seen these lowest precip deficits since the 1980s. And in the recent memory, we haven't really seen this type of lack of precipitation. I've been in Southeast Alaska for almost 20 years now, and most of my time in early career was looking at a lot of precipitation in the 2000s, and then just recently in the second half of the second decade, we started seeing this lot of deficits. And as you can see here, yes, it's the lowest since the 1980s, but there was also, if you go further south in the Panhandle, it was the lowest on record. And the duration, again, was also fairly long. And so talking about these SPIs, well, yeah, that's pretty significant, but how much rain are we actually talking about that we weren't getting? Well, this is Ketchikan, Alaska, and from October 2017 to September 2019, there was a deficit of 57 inches, and they're very highly dependable on hydroelectric power. So when you don't get this amount of precipitation, it does start, impacts start cropping up. And then if you go down towards Snettisham, which is the area where Juneau, the capital of Alaska, starts getting their hydropower, they too were also in a large deficit. And you can see that it was really got going after the October of 2018. And then if you start going to the coastal areas of Sitka, again, 39 inches, and then even our driest locations up in Haines in the farther and northern channels, it was 24 inches. So these deficits play a big economic and societal impact to these sectors, and from hydroelectric power generation, drinking water supply, and then even fisheries, from just regular public going out and doing fishing to hatcheries to commercial fishing. And then we also have impacts to our winter sports, ski resorts or heli skiing. And then something that came about from a lot of our interaction with our partners across the area was the rainforest health, and how the amount of rain that we get or don't get affects the health of the forest and the other economic sector of logging. So how we kind of work with our partners and try to build a program where there wasn't much of an infrastructure set up to gain information of impacts or just conditions across the region. So we first developed a list of partners that would be affected by a drought. And once we had this list of partners, went from fisheries people to hydroelectric dam operators to local water supply entities. We sent out these monthly emails to just give information about rainfall and snowpack information. It ranged from monthly snow and rain, percent of normal, any long-term deficits, and then try to provide some CPC outlooks so they can see if the drier conditions or warmer conditions are going to persist or if it's going to get better with a 1 to 3 month outlook. And then to help facilitate information sharing, we try to inquire about if they were seeing any impacts at their facilities. And once we would get these impacts, we would pass these along to the USDM authors and then try to make recommendations based upon those impacts on the U.S. drought. And also, after a drought is done, you want to retain these good partnerships by continued communication and information sharing with these partners. And something that we didn't really know about prior is how impactful were these events, and looking at the drought indicators from the U.S. Drought map of what impacts you would see from a D0 to a D1 to a D4 didn't really match what impacts we were seeing up in Alaska. And so it was really difficult to try to put those known impacts at these facilities into those drought classifications. So this was a big learning experience of how we can provide better information to our partners and to the public. So I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of this drought cycle that we were in starting in 2017 and how we went about to get this information to the drought authors. So first, this is a precipitation graph of Ketchikan, Alaska, and the green line is showing what happened, and then the black line is normal. And as you can see, that green line never really got close to the black line throughout this whole period of time. And October through December is our wet period of time. And when we didn't see any precipitation near normal amounts, we started to think like, wow, we're pretty dry. But in Southeast Alaska and in the temperate rainforest, those conditions can change very rapidly. We can get 1 or 2 storms that can get us back to normal or close to normal if we had a big deficits. But as you can see, the deficits persisted all the way through the winter, and also it was on the warmer side, so we didn't really have much of a snowpack. So after we started inquiring with our partners and talking to the drought authors a little bit more, we started to put up some abnormally dry over the Southeast Alaska, and then with some impacts starting to crop up over the southern panhandle with hydropower supply being limited, we started to indicate a moderate drought. And with these possible impacts, as you can see in the drought severity classification, it just had a lot of things that had to deal with crops and pastures. And from our last talk, that is a very big impact to the, portions of lower 48. But in Southeast Alaska, crops and that type of pastures is not much of an impact. So it was really hard again to see what type of category we were in with the impacts that we're seeing. So this was a depiction after the first winter, and we were starting to see these impacts. And the summer was not much better with the lack of snowpack in 2018. A lot of our stream flows were very low, starting to reach out to some of the fisheries to find out if there's any fish kills from the migrating fish coming back. And we did start to hear a little bit more information, but the bigger information sharing that we got was in providing this IDSS to the Metlakatla Indian Community down in the far areas of our area responsibility. And because the Metlakatla Indian Community is the only Indian reservation in Alaska nationally observed, we didn't really hear too much about it because they were reporting back in Washington. But one of our forecasters on one of our state EOC calls heard of a drought emergency and in Metlakatla, and they were wondering if we heard anything about it. And we didn't, but after that day, we reached out to the community to find out more about the situation and how the Weather Service could assist. And what we found out was the reservoirs were dangerously low. And these reservoirs provide drinking water and hydropower for the entire island. And the island is not that big, and there is this community that they're dealing with, but the Weather Service had a very good need to keep an eye on this because we have a radiosonde weather balloon that takes off from that island, and if they lose power, then we could lose some weather information. So it was very important for the Weather Service to keep track of this. And their backup generators, they did have 2. One was broken though, that just broke. And the other one was 40 plus years old, so it wasn't as reliable as they were hoping. So after us reaching out, we came up with a standardized template with information that we can provide to them that would help them manage their water supply a little bit better to get them back out of this really dangerous situation. So we provided this sample of information that to the Metlakatla Indian Community. And then after we did that, the mayor got back in touch with us and they requested that IDSS from our office. So over the past, over the full year, the forecast office in June provided these IDSS situational awareness packets to Metlakatla Indian Community every week for an entire year until the hardest drought impacts relaxed. And so these are just a little examples of what went into these situation reports. And when we did show this to them, we kind of went over how to read this information, what information was there. We would start off with like what the key points were, and if there was any rain coming, if it was going to stay dry, and then what was the real big messages. And then we started to intertwine some meteorology information using probabilities of using ensembles of what's the probability of significant precipitation coming per week. With the Metlakatla Indian Community, they were very new to, they hadn't seen this type of drought before, and a lot of the operators wasn't really know how to manage the water efficiently, so they wouldn't use diesel. And that was the big thing, where they didn't want to use the diesel. They wanted to concentrate and make sure that they could use the hydropower and use it efficiently for what they had. And so here's another portion of this situational report where we provided 8 to 14-day climate outlooks from CPC along with the 6 to 10. Then we started using some GEFS spreads for QPF, or how much rain they could see within the time frame, what was our confidence in them seeing that rain, and the same thing with temperatures. We did notice in the wintertime they were very interested in the temperatures of how long or how much they would get below freezing or below normal temperatures, because the community would be using more energy for heating purposes. And through that interaction with that community, we were able to share that information to the National Drought Mitigation Center and the drought authors, and we put in a D2 for Southeast Alaska during this time frame. And we were still getting impacts coming in from other portions of the Panhandle throughout from what happened in the summertime. And so we're in like the fall time. This should be wet again, and we're coming into a second water year cycle, and again we're not seeing any precipitation, and it's very odd. You know, a lot of people were very happy, you know, because it was very nice weather. You know, we're typically can be cloudy and rainy most of the time, and we were having a lot of really nice weather, so people were enjoying it, but it wasn't good for the forest or the economy. And as noted here on this on the map, we were definitely increasing our drought severity and trying to get that information out to our partners and in the sectors that were affected. And so after the winter, we still did not get any precipitation, and I was contacted by the Northwest Climate Hub for the USDA, and we started to come up with an idea of coming up with a drought workshop for Southeast Alaska, since there's a lot more highlighting of Alaska and drought, and especially in the rainforest, and to learn more about it. So the goals and the outcomes of this workshop that took place was to bring together federal, state, native, local NGO groups from the different sectors that are affected from the drought, along with scientists from different fields that were doing research or trying to see what type of effects the environment was having from a drought. And the best information that came out of this was to get a better sense of what a drought is in a rainforest, what type of impacts did take place, how do we refine these drought thresholds, and then also improving this information sharing between the different sectors. But also, how do we also increase our awareness of a drought in a rainforest to the end user? We also were soliciting information from these different sectors so we could redefine drought metrics for Southeast Alaska, which we're in the process of doing. And then also we are trying to alleviate the issue of the Weather Service reaching out to these partners and trying to get back and forth. It was seeing how we can get that information straight to the drought authors. And one way was to increase the use of using the Drought Impact Reporter. And then also, how do we try to find ways to inform of the drought status, and we identifying community-driven next steps and what was needed. And this was a great success story in the sense that we were able to get a lot of really great information. We made a lot of great partners, and it was great. One thing that came out of it was coming up with these drought indicators. So we were able to put what indicators would associate with a D0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we are kind of going into looking at what the metrics will be, which I'll go in a little bit here. But after the drought workshop, we did get a lot more information, and you'll see the difference from what the drought map looked like in May of 2019 to what happened after the summer. We increased it to a D3, which was a extreme drought for Alaska. It was the first one that we know of on the drought map since 2000. And you can see that the drought expanded further north because we started getting more information on the impacts from fish kills to forest health. There was a bug that thrives in the drought. If it was wet and cool, this fungus grows, and drought and the fungus kills the bug. But if you don't have that wet weather, the bug can multiply and fester and really hurt the forest. And it did. It was the largest outbreak on record that they know of that happened in the summer of 2019. So there's a lot of information that was shared and gained from that workshop, and it helped with the communication of what a drought is in a rainforest. And so redefining these drought metrics was also very key because we wanted to look back in time to see what other periods would have these types of impacts, which were not known in the past. So we're in the midst of coming up with what is a D1, what is a D2, and then what's like stream flows do we look at, what type of percentage, what type of hydropower reservoir capacity do they have to, if they're using diesel power or not, if there's any drinking water restrictions, is there any fish kill? So we're in the midst of going through a lot of information, a lot of data to come up with what these different percentiles would be and what intensity they should be at. And so in the end, we want to continue our partner interaction. So we've been providing updates on the progress from the workshop, and then also informing of the public of the new Drought Impact Reporter to help continue to facilitate those information sharing. And continue to gather data and analyze to improve those drought metrics. And then we also, this whole interaction definitely fosters deeper partnership with our core partners, along with the USDA Climate Hub and NIDIS and the U.S. Drought Mitigation Center. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Aaron. You just answered my question about continued engagement with these new partners that you developed. I think in the interest of time, we'll move on, but if you have questions for Aaron, his email address is right here on the screen. So I think we'll transition to Klaus and then Rebecca, who are going to share about drought coordination and communication in North Carolina. And I expect that we'll go slightly past the top of the hour, so thank you for staying with us. All right, so over to Klaus.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen. Okay, you should be able to see my screen. Is it in, there we go. Good afternoon. As Maggie said, I'm Klaus Albertin. I'm the chair of the North Carolina Drought Management Advisory Council, and I work for the North Carolina Division of Water Resources. I'm going to talk real briefly about our process, really focusing on why I think it helps local communication, why it's so effective. Just a little history. The group kind of informally started in 1992 to keep track of reservoir resources, rainfall, things like that. But it was given statutory status in 2003 following our drought of record. It was further refined in 2008, really defining who should be on the council, what their responsibilities are, and procedure as far as what have to get into extreme or exceptional drought. That was driven by the second drought of record. There's quite a few partners, and this is also a key to why it is so effective. We've got a weekly call that's done year-round. Most of the time, there's kind of a core group. It's not all the agencies that participate. But each week, usually we get a retrospective from the State Climate Office looking at rainfall in the last week, 2 weeks, month, 30 days, percent of normal, SPEI, soil moisture, that sort of thing. Then we get a forecast from the Weather Service. We've got 6 primary climate offices in North Carolina. Raleigh usually does the forecast, but usually at least 2 or 3 of the other offices do participate in the call to give their input on drought conditions. Then we get an update from USGS on surface flow, 7-day, 28-day average stream flows across the state. Then USGS and our state groundwater network staff talk about what groundwater conditions are seeing, what the trends are. Next, our reservoir partners talk about what they're seeing, if they're having any issues. So we've got TVA, Army Corps of Engineers, Duke Energy, and Cube Hydro. And then Forest Service gives a kind of the fire weather report, what the KBDIs are looking like, do they have any active fires, how things are turning out. And then usually the end of the call is the Ag Extension representative. He'll talk about what the different extension offices across the state are reporting, dry, wet, are they able to get in the field? And this really is helpful too, because it gives us a little bit more on the ground feel for what is happening. So not just relying on satellite data and estimated or measured things. It's really people out in the field saying what they're seeing. Then if we get into a little bit more extreme drought, we may have reports from the state water supply staff talking about, are any systems going into conservation? Are they hitting some critical statuses? Wildlife resources will give input if they're seeing any issues. And then finally, water quality staff may call in to say that they're seeing low DO because of stream flows or high temperatures, things like that. And then once we get all these reports, we have a group consensus. And I think this is kind of the key for our communication, is all the partners that are on the call have a voice in deciding where the boundaries should be. Are we staying with status quo? Are we going into a worse classification of drought in a specific area? So the whole group decides what it is. And once we come up with that consensus, then we provide that information to the U.S. Drought Monitor. As far as communication goes, again, we provide the input to the USDM. 99% of the time, they accept our recommendations. They may have a few questions, but they're good with it. Then we put up our map of, the different classifications and a list of the counties that are affected. And then we work with the State Climate Office to communicate any specific items of interest, and Rebecca's going to go into a little bit more about that. And then we may do press releases if we're going into drought, if we're coming out of drought, if anything that's kind of interest, our PIO do a press release. But again, what I think is the most effective about our process is there's a common message coming from the agencies to the stakeholders. So if there's a question about why we're in this drought level to Army Corps of Engineers, they know why, what drove the decision, they can communicate it. Same thing with USDA, USGS. So everybody has a common message, and that's really critical so that you don't have kind of these conflicting things or kind of assumptions or guesses about why, we're in a given classification in a given part of the state. And also the agencies had an input into it, so they can't say, well, the state decided to do this. It is a group decision. And then if we do get into D3 or D4, D3 get more of a full agency participation. There's more regular press releases. And D4, that gets into task forces across the entire government, Department of Commerce, Utilities Commission. The governor will start having, press conferences. There's a dedicated press. So at that point, we're getting out of the kind of typical communication, I think, that you all are interested in. I think so. I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca. She's going to talk more about the, D0, D1, D2 sort of situations and how we communicate that to the public. But again, I was focused on how we communicate within the agencies and how they can communicate to their staff, which really is critical. So I will stop sharing and let Rebecca share her presentation.
Okay, and can you all see my slides and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. So Klaus, that was a really great kind of, so what I'm going to talk about is more of that, how do we communicate about drought to stakeholders in North Carolina, and what I'm talking about really would not be possible without that coordination and communication that happens within the North Carolina Drought Management Advisory Council. So what I'm talking about today is a specific project that my office, the State Climate Office of North Carolina, has been working on with the NOAA Carolina's Integrated Sciences and Assessments. And it kind of comes, is motivated by this during past droughts, and particularly in times when we might be in, no drought conditions, but things are starting to dry out, or we're in some of those sort of lighter, less severe drought categories that we've gotten a lot of questions from, calling in from the media or even broadcast meteorologists or just general, public wanting to know, what is this map? How is it made? Is it just precipitation? Who's in charge of it? And, we, from my involvement on the Drought Council in North Carolina, we're always very upfront and try to be very transparent about that process. But there was clearly this perception that the information just wasn't accessible, and it really wasn't transparent. And so the goals of our project, which is a NOAA NIDIS funded project, is to connect decision makers, specifically focusing in agriculture, forestry, and water resources, to drought information by how to make that information more accessible.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we're seeing your slides cut up on the right side here. You can just see the left side of your slide. Is there a way to change the viewpoint? Actions.
It is full screen on my computer. Let me see. that different?
No, it's back to the same. I wonder if you could just share from your the editing mode, if that would be easier.
Can you see it now? Full screen?
Still just the left half of the slide.
Okay. How about, do you see my main screen now?
Much better, thank you.
Okay. Let's try that. Is that full screen still?
Oh, yes, much better. Sorry to interrupt.
Great. Sorry about that. Yeah, so just to say that the project is a coordination between my office and CISA. I really wanted to emphasize that. We're working closely with stakeholders across the state in developing and thinking about how to communicate effectively about drought. And so I just wanted to say that we took this as an opportunity to go from being a little bit more reactionary. You know, we would get a question about drought and then thinking about it as more of a, how do we systematically become more proactive in our drought communication? So we focused a lot on if we're going to develop new informational resources, let's really collect information from our stakeholders through surveys, through other types of engagements on what they want and how they want it. And then we went about developing and then refining them through various types of engagements, from surveys and in-person feedback. We even did some eye tracking studies. And then we also focused a lot on, once we had created resources, how best to actually distribute those resources. So looking at strategies that take place through social media or email or presentations, how best to actually take the information that we've created and put it into the hands of our stakeholders. And I just wanted to hit the high notes of some of the things that we really learned through this process. We focused really closely on the you know, what to communicate and when to communicate and how to communicate. And I'll go through this quickly, but regarding drought, you know, and I think that this really comes back to, you know, nothing that's going to be a surprise based on some of the presentations we've already heard today. But knowing, you know, what is that drought status, but also why, you know, what went into the map? Is it because we have a week without precipitation, or is it because we're starting to see crops suffer, or is it because we're starting to see our water supplies? Really understanding and teasing out some of those differences. Talking about the context, so, you know, why should I care? Making sure that that's really obvious. And then what to expect in the future. So time and time again, especially within the agricultural sector, needing to know that, you know, not just is it dry this week, but is it going to be dry next week? Might we see some improvement? Do we need to start taking some actions in the field to mitigate any losses? In terms of when, it really came down to, you know, how often should we communicate, and then also just in relation to there being a drought event. So with water resources, we found that a lot of times, you know, they might, water resources managers might be paying attention, but when it comes to them actually communicating with their clients or customers, it's only when they actually are experiencing drought conditions. And then contrasting that with agriculture and forestry, it was really, no, I want to know all the time, we're communicating about it all the time. So just knowing exactly when your audience, who you're targeting, when they're going to actually care about it enough to communicate it down the line. And then the how to communicate. So here we focused on, you know, what format and medium. So, oops, look at that. I'll switch around, sorry. So starting us then with channels. So we didn't want to create anything that would then force somebody to go to a new place to get that information. We wanted to make sure that they were able to see it in places where they were already going. So a lot of people, you know, want things through existing email listservs, or if they're getting it on social media, depending on the audience. Extension agents really prefer things on Facebook in North Carolina, whereas water utilities a lot of times are using Twitter. So knowing that distinction. And then the North Carolina Drought Management Advisory Council's website, ncdrought.org, that was a key place too to go for information. Also thinking about the formats and the medium. So we did collect information about what were those preferred formats and preferred ways of accessing information, and then what were the ones that were maybe not preferred, but just maybe not as preferred. And so we used that to, as we were developing informational resources, as we were thinking about how best to communicate and distribute, making sure that we were keeping this in mind. And then just making sure that if we're providing information, because again, the goals of this weren't to create new information, but to translate information that already existed, is to make sure that we keep that connection with the source of the information. So if we're talking about a forecast and it came from the National Weather Service, just making sure that it's very clear and very prominent that that is where the information originated. That's kind of the three areas. And I want to just highlight some of the resources that we did develop under this project. And these were all, keeping those sort of practices in mind I just talked about, and that we had refined through those various engagements. So one is a weekly drought update infographic. And this kind of reminds me a little bit of what Ray described earlier. So this is just a one-page infographic that describes impacts around the state. It would have the current drought map, which as of last week in North Carolina was blank, in which showed the transition between the previous week. And then it would provide an overview of maybe what's changed or just some additional contextual information. We also worked and developed some infographics to try to relate some of that, what to expect over the upcoming weeks. And we did do some engagements with the National Weather Service offices in the Carolinas just to get feedback on how useful is something like this. One interesting note that I thought I would share is that on the bottom of this infographic, we do talk about the forecast confidence. And our stakeholders came back and said that, what was really helpful with just seeing that displayed on the infographic is it was a visual cue that they needed to come back later to see the updated forecast that would hopefully have some more confidence. And then just some other things. We worked, as Klaus mentioned before, with the Division of Water Resources to help provide some input into their website. We helped develop a story map to try to talk about that weekly process for monitoring drought, and then develop several fact sheets, quick handouts that people can use when they're talking about drought or even comparing a current event to a historic event. So just some big takeaways is, as we were going through this process is just thinking about, we want to create new infographics or resources, but how important it really is to evaluate them. What we thought would work wasn't always the case, especially, I'm a climatologist by training. I'm not a water resources manager, so I don't always have a great feel for what that user is going to want. Translating information is really important, but you don't want to translate it to where there's just no meaning left. So you have to know when to stop translating and retain some of that technical information there. And then just, again, really knowing your audience. When are they going to use your products, and then why are they going to use your products? And with that should be everything. I just wanted to acknowledge the support for the project, and then again, just really acknowledge that this wouldn't be possible without the DMAC or any of our stakeholders across the state. And there is my contact information.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and also to Klaus. And I noticed that we have several participants from NIDIS here as well. So I guess I wonder about the lessons learned in communicating drought. Are those available in a document or on a website? Because I think they're much widely applicable, outside of North Carolina as well.
Yeah, so we are, so our project, I should have mentioned, is wrapping up at the end of August. So we're in the process of putting some final documents together, some, like 2-page or 4-page handouts that describe some of those lessons learned that could, other states or other groups could use. So forthcoming soon, and they will be available on our website, which is there in the red font on the bottom of the slide.
So thank you, Rebecca. Well, I don't see any further questions. So I just wanted to thank all of our speakers today. Again, these are really excellent examples of effective drought communication and coordination over local and state areas. So again, if you're interested in these kind of topics, please join us August 25th for the next drought-related